You are already awake when it happens, not waking up to church bells, not being shaken out of sleep by a roommate smelling of last night's ale. No, you're already on your feet, already moving through the back corridors of number 14, Grosvenor Place, already carrying a scuttle of coal up the servants' stairs in the dark before 5 in the morning, and that's when you feel it. A warmth, then a heaviness, then the cold, spreading understanding of what that warmth and that heaviness mean. You stop on the stairs, stand absolutely still in the dark, one hand pressed flat against the rough plaster wall, the other gripping the iron handle of the coal scuttle until your knuckles ache. You count backward in your head. Try to. The days blur together in service. Every day the same shape, same hours, same tasks in the same order, and the weeks pile up on top of each other until you lose track. 28 days, or 30, or 25. You've never been sure. You've never had reason to be precise before, because before you worked here, you were at home in Somerset. And at home this was managed differently. At home, your mother knew. She always knew before you did, somehow. Watching your face go pale and shadowed, pressing a cloth into your hands before you'd even registered the need. Your mother is 120 miles away, and you're standing on the servants' staircase of a Mayfair townhouse with a coal scuttle in your hand and the certain knowledge that your day just became significantly more complicated. So, it's the 14th of March, 1887. This is what your morning looks like now. Welcome to it. Take a breath. Set the scuttle down on the step for just a moment, because we're going to be here for a while. And there's a lot I need to tell you about what women did before someone finally had the decency to invent the sanitary pad, which didn't happen, by the way, in any meaningful commercial sense, until you are already middle-aged and the century has already turned. You have decades of this ahead of you. So does every woman you know. So did every woman they knew. So have women everywhere, in every country, in every century, stretching back to the very beginning of recorded human history. Since the first woman bled, she has had to find something to do about it. Something to wear, something to use, something to hide it with, something to manage the weight and the warmth and the mess and the smell and the absolute determination of polite society to pretend that none of this is happening at all. That's what tonight is about. Not just your problem on this staircase in 1887. All of it. Going back to Egypt, to Rome, to the medieval washerwomen who bled freely into their skirts because there was nothing else to do, to the Victorian woman reading pamphlets that told her bathing during her monthly would kill her, to the nurses in the First World War who discovered by accident that bandaging material worked better than anything they'd ever tried. All of it. One long story about something that happened to half the human population every single month for thousands of years and was barely spoken about, barely written about, barely acknowledged at all, until very recently. And I make these sleep history stories and I genuinely don't know if this is the kind of thing you want to fall asleep to. Maybe you do. Maybe you've been waiting for someone to actually talk about this properly, in full sentences, without flinching. Maybe you came across this video at midnight and thought, yes, this is exactly the kind of historical deep dive I need while I stare at the ceiling. Either way, get comfortable. This is going to be long and honest and occasionally gross the way all actual history is. Here we go. Pick up the coal scuttle. You can't just stand on the stairs. Mrs. Holt will notice you've been gone too long, and Mrs. Holt notices everything. You pick up the scuttle. You continue up the stairs. You do what you always do, which is carry on. because that is what women on the 14th of March, 1887, are trained from infancy to do. Carry on. The staircase is narrow and steep and smells of dust and old plaster and the faint ghost of coal smoke from 100 mornings exactly like this one. The walls are bare here. No paper, no paint. Just plaster the colour of old skin. This is the part of the house no one sees. The part where the work happens. The kitchen 2 floors below you is already steaming with the day's first heat. You heard cook rattling the range when you came through at 4:30, the clang of iron on iron echoing up through the floor, and the smell of wood smoke and then coal catching, and then gradually the first suggestion of bread. Upstairs the family sleeps. Mr. and Mrs. Ashworth in their separate rooms on the first floor. The 2 daughters, Miss Clara and Miss Evelyn, in their rooms on the second. The son, Mr. Frederick, when he's home from Cambridge, in the room at the end of the hall. They will wake at 7. They will ring for hot water at 15:15. They will dress with help, eat breakfast with ceremony, and descend to their day, which will involve visiting cards and luncheons and possibly a drive in the park, and none of them will think once about the fact that the house runs on the labour of 9 women and 2 men who started work before dawn. You are one of those 9 women, the second youngest, 16 years old, arrived from Taunton 8 months ago with a trunk of clothes your mother packed so carefully it made you cry, a letter of character from the vicar, and no idea whatsoever what you were actually getting yourself into. Now you know. Now you are carrying coal up these stairs in the dark in the middle of a problem you need to solve before anyone notices you have a problem. The coal scuttle is heavy, cast iron, with a rounded body and a narrow lip for pouring. Full, it weighs close to 15 pounds. Your right arm is stronger than your left from carrying it. You've been here 8 months, and your right arm is already visibly larger than your left, which your mother would find horrifying. Your mother would find a great many things about this house horrifying. The top of the stairs. You push through the baize door, the one that separates the back of the house from the front, the one that muffles the sounds of all that labour, and you step into the carpeted silence of the family's world. The hallway up here is a different country. Wallpaper in sage green and ivory, a pattern of stylized ferns, a mahogany side table with a Chinese vase on it, holding dried flowers, a runner carpet of dark red wool so thick your feet sink into it slightly, paintings in gilt frames, a smell that is the opposite of the stairs you just came up, beeswax and roses and something faintly floral that must be the potpourri Mrs. Ashworth keeps in ceramic dishes in every room. You move through it quickly. You're not supposed to be seen. The fireplace in the drawing room first, down on your knees on the hearthrug, which is worth more than your annual salary. Clear the ash, which goes into the ash bucket, which you will carry back down the same stairs and out to the collection bin in the mews. Lay the new paper and kindling, set the coal, light it with a long match. The sulphur smells sharp and chemical in the soft-smelling room. Wait to see it catch. Then the next room. Then the one after that. Your knees are already grey with ash by the time you get to the third fireplace, and you're very aware of what's happening inside your own body, the heaviness settling in your lower back now, a dull and specific ache that you know the shape of, and you are calculating mentally what you have and what you can do about it. You have, in the pocket of your dress, a folded square of cotton flannel, about 7 inches by 5. You made it yourself 3 months ago from a piece of worn-out petticoat that was past its usefulness as a petticoat. You cut it with scissors borrowed from Mrs. Jennings, the sewing woman, hemmed the edges roughly on a quiet Sunday afternoon, folded it and put it in your pocket. You've been carrying it for 3 months. This is called being prepared. Women call it different things. Your mother called it being sensible. The older servants in this house call it various things, mostly spoken in low voices in the kitchen when the men aren't about, because this is not a subject for mixed company. This is not, in fact, a subject at all. It is a thing that happens and is dealt with in silence. What you don't have is enough. One piece of cloth is not enough for a full day, and the day ahead of you is long, very long. And you can't just duck away whenever you need to. You have a schedule. Mrs. Holt has a schedule. Mrs. Holt's schedule is written in a leather notebook and consulted with the devotion most people reserve for sacred texts. So, think. You finish lighting the fires. You carry the ash bucket back down the servants' stairs. You empty it in the mews in the grey pre-dawn, the cold air hitting your face, and you stand there for a moment in the alley behind the house, where the morning smells of horse dung and wet stone, and somewhere, faintly, bread from the bakery 3 streets away. London before dawn. The city hasn't woken up yet, or rather, the part of London that matters hasn't woken up. The part of London that carries coal and empties ash and bakes bread and drives the milk carts has been awake for 2 hours already. You go back inside. The kitchen is fully alive now. Mrs. Beeks, the cook, who has been here for 22 years and who has opinions about everything, is standing at the range in a wash of steam and heat, turning rashers in a heavy pan. The smell is extraordinary. Bacon fat and hot metal and wood smoke and the bread she's pulled from the oven, sitting on a rack near the window. Elsie, the kitchen maid, is scrubbing potatoes at the sink, her red raw hands working automatically, not looking up. And at the far end of the kitchen table, already seated with a cup of tea and her leather notebook, is Mrs. Holt. Mrs. Holt is the housekeeper. She is 44 years old, which seems ancient to you, though you understand in some vague way that it is not. She has grey hair pulled back so severely that the skin at her temples appears slightly stretched. She has brown eyes that miss nothing. She's been in service since she was 14, which means she's worked in this particular world for 30 years, and every one of those years is visible in the way she holds herself, the way she sits, the absolute stillness of her at the kitchen table with her tea and her notebook, and her awareness of everyone in the room without appearing to look at anyone at all. Agnes, she says, not looking up from her notebook. Mrs. Holt? You were on the stairs 8 minutes longer than usual. You had counted on this not being noticed. I'm sorry, Mrs. Holt. The fire in the second drawing room was slow to catch. She writes something. Whether she believes you or is recording the infraction for later, you cannot tell. Finish your breakfast and begin the upstairs rooms. Miss Clara wants her room done early this morning. She's going out at 9. You get your breakfast. A cup of tea, brown and thick and sweet, and a heel of bread with dripping. You eat it standing at the kitchen counter because that is where the junior maids eat. Sitting at the table is for the senior staff. Another thing you've learned in 8 months. The bread is good. The dripping is good. You drink the tea fast because it is hot, and the hot feels necessary this morning, a warmth you can swallow down into the ache in your lower back. You need to speak to Mrs. Jennings. Mrs. Jennings is the lady's maid. She attends personally to Mrs. Ashworth, to Miss Clara, and to Miss Evelyn. She's 31 years old, thin, with precise movements and very clean hands. She's not exactly warm, but she's not unkind. She has, on 2 previous occasions in your 8 months here, demonstrated a practical understanding of the realities of being female in domestic service. She's also the person who keeps, in a locked drawer in her workroom on the upper corridor, a supply of materials that the female staff may quietly, without comment, request access to as needed. You have used this system once before, in January. But Mrs. Jennings doesn't start her own day until 6:30, and it's barely 5:20, and you have rooms to do. So you go do the rooms. Miss Clara's first because Mrs. Holt said so. Up the back stairs again, through the baize door, into the carpeted world. Miss Clara Ashworth is 20 years old and is asleep on her back with her mouth slightly open, which would horrify her if she knew. She's generally considered very beautiful. She has the room redecorated last year in pale yellow, with curtains of cream silk that cost a sum you don't want to think about, a dressing table with 3 mirrors, a wardrobe of carved oak the size of a small shed, a washstand with a ceramic bowl and pitcher painted with roses. You come in quietly. You do not look at her. You go to the fireplace, down on your knees again, clear the ash from last night which cooled to grey dust overnight, the smell of cold fire, the texture of fine powder under your fingers. Lay the new fire. Light it. Watch it catch. You begin to make the bed, which cannot be fully done until she wakes and rises, but you can straighten and refresh and prepare. You straighten the coverlet. You collect the stocking she's dropped on the floor. You pick up the book she was reading and mark the page with a ribbon before setting it on the nightstand. You try not to look at her dressing table, but you look anyway, because on Miss Clara's dressing table, between the perfume bottles and the powder box, is something you've noticed before and thought about with some regularity. A small paper package, white paper neatly folded, about the size of a book. The label is discreet. Most things that come into this house with that particular quality of discretion are the same general category. They are things women need and are not supposed to discuss. You know what's in that package, though. You know because Mrs. Jennings let slip 3 months ago when explaining the locked drawer system that Miss Clara purchases her own supply from a chemist on Regent Street and considers it a private matter, which is why she would prefer the housemaids not discuss it or handle it unnecessarily. Inside that package are Southall's sanitary towels, 12 for 2 shillings and 6pence. You make 11 shillings a month. You set the stockings over the chair and quietly leave the room. Here's the thing I want you to understand about Southall's sanitary towels, which began selling commercially in the 1880s, and about Lister's sanitary towels, and about every other discreetly packaged product beginning to appear in chemist shops and catalogue pages in the England of 1887. They existed, commercially, technically available, and they were completely out of reach for any woman who worked for wages. This is the architecture of the problem, not just in 1887, not just in England. This is the architecture of the problem going back to the very beginning of human history. Women who were wealthy had access to materials, to servants who dealt with laundry without comment, to private rooms and sufficient privacy, and the time to attend to their own comfort. The higher up the social scale you went, the more solutions were available, and the less you were expected to suffer visibly. Women who worked in the fields or the factories or the kitchens or the laundries had nothing but their own ingenuity and whatever fabric they could spare from clothing that was already barely adequate, and the absolute requirement to keep working regardless. The gap between those two experiences was enormous. It has always been enormous. Let's go back further, much further. Not 8 months ago to Taunton, not 8 years ago, centuries, millennia. Let's go to Egypt, because they wrote things down in Egypt, and one of the things they wrote down on papyrus in the time of the pharaohs was a description of what women used during their monthly, and the answer, approximately 3,500 years before you are standing in this hallway outside Miss Clara's room, was papyrus. Not the stiff, dry papyrus you think of, not the writing material. Papyrus could be softened, pounded to a fibrous mass, shaped and tucked and held in place. Some accounts suggest it was soaked first, either in water or in various plant preparations to make it more absorbent. Some papyrus preparations were mixed with oil or resin. The ancient Egyptians were not by any measure a crude people. They had pharmacological knowledge, surgical knowledge, textile knowledge. If they said papyrus, they had probably worked out exactly what they meant. There are scholars who debate this. There are always scholars who debate this. For a very long time, the field of historical medicine was composed almost entirely of men who had very little personal motivation to spend their research time thinking carefully about menstrual management in the ancient world. Things have improved, not enough, but some. The ancient Egyptians also kept records of what women were told about menstruation itself, which is its own historical adventure. The blood was considered powerful, dangerous, connected to cycles of the moon and fertility and forces that were not entirely controlled or controllable. This is a pattern you will see repeating across cultures and centuries. The blood is not merely inconvenient, it is meaningful, it is feared, and the fear is managed through ritual and restriction, and a great deal of instruction about what menstruating women must not do. In ancient Egypt, menstruating women were not necessarily secluded or excluded from daily life, the way they would be in other cultures. The evidence for Egyptian practice is incomplete and contested, but the blood itself was taken seriously, treated as a substance with properties, managed with intention. Ancient Rome took a different approach to both the management and the meaning. Pliny the Elder, writing in the 1st century CE, had opinions about menstruation. He had many opinions about many things, and most of them were wrong, and menstruation was no exception. According to Pliny, the touch of a menstruating woman would turn wine sour, cause seeds to dry up, kill bees, rust iron, dim mirrors, blunt the edge of razors, cause dogs to go mad, and strip the lustre from ivory. He did not, perhaps, get out much, but his views were not unusual for his time, or indeed for any time between his time and a significantly later time. The idea that menstruating women were in some sense dangerous, contaminating, capable of affecting the world around them through the power of their blood, is one of the most persistent beliefs in human history. It appears in texts from ancient India, from Greece, from Rome, from medieval Christian Europe, from the Islamic world, from indigenous cultures on multiple continents. The specifics vary, the restrictions vary, the reasoning varies, but the essential belief that there is something about this blood that requires careful management, not merely for practical reasons, but because the blood itself is a force. That belief runs through millennia like a thread you could follow from Egypt to this hallway in Mayfair without once losing it. What did Roman women actually use, as opposed to what Pliny believed about their condition? Wool. The most common answer across most of the classical world is wool. Soft, absorbent, available to anyone who kept sheep, which in the ancient Mediterranean meant almost everyone. Wool prepared in various ways. Wool pads held in place by undergarments, or held in place by hand, or held in place by wrapping cloth around the hips, in ways that have not been perfectly reconstructed, because the women who knew exactly how they did it were not writing treatises. The Greek physician Hippocrates, in the 5th century BCE, is thought to have mentioned wool used internally as well as externally. There is historical debate about this, about what exactly was meant and whether translation has distorted the original text. But the possibility of internally placed materials, what would later be called a pessary, in the context of other gynecological management, was evidently not foreign to ancient medical thinking. Sea sponges. This is the other answer that recurs in classical sources. Small sea sponges, used by some women, secured with a thread or a cord, used in ways that are more internal in nature. Sponges from the Mediterranean were a regular trade good, used in bathing, in cosmetics, in medicine. They absorb. They can be rinsed and reused. For women near the sea or near trade routes that brought sea goods inland, they were available. Not for everyone, not for most. For most women, in most of history, the answer to the question of what they used was whatever they had. Torn cloth. Old clothing worn down past usefulness. Wool they could pull from fleece. Moss in some circumstances. Cattail fluff in others. The lining of animal intestines dried and shaped. The ingenuity is breathtaking. It is also, if you sit with it, genuinely heartbreaking. Because what it tells you is that for the entire span of human history until a very few generations ago, managing this was entirely each woman's individual problem, solved with individual resourcefulness using available materials, with no cultural infrastructure for support, no commercial products designed for the purpose, no medical guidelines based on actual understanding of female physiology, and no public conversation whatsoever about any of it. This was the deal. You were born, and at some point between 10 and 16 you began bleeding, and you sorted it out yourself, or with help from your mother or another woman, and you managed it every month for approximately 30 years, and then eventually it stopped, and not one public word was said about any of it. That was the deal. You're living inside this deal right now in a hallway in Mayfair. Go do Miss Evelyn's room. Miss Evelyn Ashworth is 17 years old, almost your age. Her room is smaller than her sister's, because she's younger and has not yet had a chance to negotiate its redecorating. It is done in blue, a faded, dusty blue that was fashionable 4 years ago, and now looks slightly tired. She has a bookshelf with actual books on it, novels mostly, though there is a volume of natural history that looks genuinely read, its spine soft from use. She is awake. This is unusual. Miss Evelyn does not generally wake before her bell. She's sitting up in bed, pale-faced, with her arms wrapped around her own midsection, and when you come in with the ash bucket and the coal and the matches, she looks at you with an expression you recognise immediately, with total animal recognition, because you are wearing the same expression yourself. "Agnes," she says. Her voice is very controlled, which is the Ashworth family trait. They do not make a display. "Miss Evelyn, I'm feeling rather unwell this morning." She's not unwell. You both know what this is. But that is not what you say, because that is not how this is discussed. "I'm sorry to hear it, miss. Would you like me to ask Mrs. Jennings to bring you something hot?" "If you please." You tend the fire. You move quietly around the room. You're aware of her watching you, and you are aware of a strange solidarity in this room this morning that you cannot acknowledge, because she is the daughter of the house, and you are the housemaid. And that distance is absolute, more absolute than the physical distance between your bodies, and it does not matter that you are essentially experiencing the same morning. It does not matter one bit. because you will carry on with your duties for the next 14 hours. She will be brought tea and hot water bottles and excused from obligations and allowed to rest in bed with a novel, and Mrs. Jennings will attend to her needs with discretion and care, and this will be considered perfectly appropriate. You set the fire guard in place. You pick up your bucket. Agnes, you turn. Miss Evelyn's face is still controlled, still pale, but there is something in her expression that is making an effort of a different kind. Do you... She stops, tries again. Is your situation ever rather... She cannot finish the sentence. You understand every word of the sentence she cannot finish. I manage perfectly well, miss, you say. Thank you for asking. And you leave the room. In the hallway you stand for a moment with your bucket and your armful of ash and your private crisis, and you breathe very carefully through your nose. Then you go find Mrs. Jennings. She's in her workroom, which is a small room at the far end of the upper corridor, furnished with a sewing table and a dress stand and a wardrobe and a chest of drawers and the locked drawer that you need. She's already dressed, already at her sewing table, already working on something. She's always already working. You have never seen Mrs. Jennings not working. You suspect she began working the moment she was born and has not stopped since. She looks at your face when you come in, and she understands immediately. Close the door, she says, not unkindly. You close the door. She opens the locked drawer. It contains, among other things, a folded stack of cotton flannel rectangles, hemmed on all four sides about 10 inches by 6. They are plain and clean and smell of washing. She takes 3 and holds them out to you. There's a pins box on the shelf, she says. You'll need pins to keep them secure. You take the cloths. You take 2 safety pins from the small box on the shelf. Thank you, Mrs. Jennings. Also, she says, and she's already turned back to her work, her needle moving again, her attention apparently fully on the seam she's repairing. Miss Evelyn will need her hot water bottle refilled by 8 and a cup of weak tea. Tell cook. Yes, Mrs. Jennings, and close the drawer on your way out. You close the drawer. You leave the room. Now, let me tell you about the pins. Safety pins in 1887 are not the safety pins you know. They're closer, the safety pin as a concept, with the coiled spring and the clasp that covers the point, was patented in the United States in 1849 by a man named Walter Hunt, who invented it more or less accidentally while trying to pay off a debt by inventing something. He sold the patent for $400. He should have held on to it. By 1887, safety pins are common, cheap, sold in papers at haberdashers, available at any market. They're used for everything, and one of the things they're used for is holding sanitary cloths in place. This is the system. And when I say the system, I want you to understand that this is not a euphemism or a simplification. This is the actual mechanical system most women in 1887 Britain are using. You take your flannel rectangle, you fold it, you place it between your undergarments and your body where it needs to be. You use the safety pins to pin it to your undergarments. Your drawers, which are the loose cotton leggings worn under your petticoats, split open at the crotch in the fashion of the era, the opening that in ordinary circumstances provides convenience, but in this context provides approximately 0 structural support for anything you're trying to secure. This is more complicated than I'm making it sound. There is an art to the pinning. The placement of the pins matters enormously. Too far to one side and the whole arrangement shifts when you walk. Too tight and the pin digs into skin. Too loose and nothing is actually secured. The flannel shifts anyway. It shifts when you kneel to tend fires. It shifts when you carry heavy things. It shifts on the stairs. It shifts when you bend to make beds. It shifts when you reach to dust-high shelves. And every time it shifts, you are aware of it. You are aware of it with every movement of your body. You are carrying this awareness through your entire day, alongside all the other things you're required to be aware of, the fires and the dusting and the bed making and the meals and Mrs. Holt and her notebook. This is your day now. And here is the thing about that awareness, the thing that women in 1887 and women in 1287 and women in 487 BCE all share. You learn to move in a way that keeps the arrangement as stable as possible. You develop a kind of constant background physical management, an adjustment to your posture, your gait, your way of bending and kneeling and reaching. It becomes unconscious, mostly. Part of the body's vocabulary. Women who've never experienced this do not see it, because it's invisible. Women who have experienced it recognize it in other women, with a glance sometimes, and say nothing. Go do the main staircase now. The banisters need polishing. You can think while you polish. The beeswax tin is in the cupboard under the main stairs, on the shelf below the boot blacking. You work up from the ground floor, a clean cloth in one hand, the tin in the other, the smooth cold brass of the banister rails warming under your palms as you work. Beeswax and lemon oil. The smell is good, actually. Clean in a way that coal ash and chamber pots are not. You think about the drawers. You think about what they contain and what they don't contain and why. Here's what's in Mrs. Jennings's locked drawer. In the careful economy of this household, clean flannel cloths, made from worn-out petticoats and flannel nightgowns that have been cut down and hemmed. Some of them show faint stains that laundering has reduced but not entirely removed, the ghost of previous use that the washing can diminish but cannot completely erase. You've seen them hanging in the laundry on the line at the back, discreetly placed in a corner, and you've washed them yourself, because part of your duties in the rotation of laundry work includes the washing of all the household's linens, and these linens are simply part of that. Washed without comment, dried without comment, returned without comment to the drawer. There is also in the drawer a small bottle of something that Mrs. Jennings did not identify to you, but that you recognise from the smell as lavender water, which you suspect is useful for reasons of general management. And there is a note in Mrs. Jennings' careful handwriting, which you saw when the drawer opened, a small piece of paper folded twice. You didn't read it. You didn't need to. You've been in enough households, through enough conversations in kitchens and laundry rooms, to know that in most service households there is a system. Someone, the housekeeper, the lady's maid, occasionally the cook, maintains a supply, discreet but real, for the use of the female staff, because the alternative is chaos, because a housemaid who has nothing to use is a housemaid who ruins garments that belong to the household, and then everyone has a problem that must be explained. Practical economy, that's what Mrs. Jennings's drawer is. Not kindness necessarily, economy. Though sometimes kindness looks the same as economy, and it doesn't matter which one it is. The banisters take half an hour. By the time you reach the top, the house is beginning to wake. You can hear movement from the direction of Mr. and Mrs. Ashworth's rooms, the ring of the bell, Mrs. Jennings' quick footsteps on the upper corridor. You can hear Elsie beginning to carry hot water upstairs in the copper can, the soft thud of it against the stair risers. The family's morning is beginning. Yours began 3 hours ago, down to the kitchen. More tea if there is any, though there often isn't by this point. Breakfast for the family being prepared. Eggs. 2 different preparations, because Mr. Ashworth prefers his boiled, and Mrs. Ashworth prefers hers scrambled, and Miss Clara is currently on a programme of dietary improvement that requires hers poached, and nobody asks Miss Evelyn this morning because Miss Evelyn is unwell. Mrs. Beeks stands at the range with the practised authority of someone who's made more breakfast than she can count, which is true. She's been cooking in this house since before either of the Miss Ashworths were born. She knows the preferences of everyone in the family with the detailed precision of someone who has studied them, which she has. She knows that Mr. Ashworth's boiled egg must be exactly 4 minutes, and that if it's 4.5 he doesn't say anything, but his expression over the egg reveals all. She knows that Miss Clara's poached egg must be set on a piece of toast that has been made and buttered before the egg is started so that the toast is still warm when the egg arrives on it. These are the things she knows. You stand in the kitchen doorway for a moment watching her. She's a square, solid woman of 50, with arms that look as though they were constructed for the specific purpose of operating the particular range in this particular kitchen. Her face is red from the heat, and her hair is coming loose from her cap already, which is a constant state for Mrs. Beeks, because she moves too vigorously for her cap to maintain decorum. She glances over. "You look grey," she says. "Sit down a minute." This is an unusual invitation. You accept it. You sit at the kitchen table, the far end, the end for junior staff, and she brings you a mug of tea that she pours without being asked. It is, you think, the best mug of tea you've ever had, because you need it in a way you rarely need things. "Your month," she says. She says it the way she says everything, directly, without fuss, as a statement of fact requiring no particular emotional response. "Yes, cook." She nods. She goes back to the eggs. "I was 12, she says, not looking at you. "First time. Thought I was dying. Mother was at the market. I ran 3 streets to find her, and she gave me what for making a scene." You wrap your hands around the mug. The ceramic is warm and solid. "She didn't tell you it was coming?" "She told me something was coming eventually, just not what it would feel like exactly, or what to do about it." The eggs spit in the pan. 12, you say. You were 13, early enough to be frightening. "My grandmother," says Mrs. Beeks, not stopping moving, turning the eggs, checking the temperature under the pots with the practised assessment of someone who reads heat the way a sailor reads wind. "My grandmother told me her grandmother used to stuff her drawers with grass." Grass, dried grass, in summer. In winter I don't know what she used. Whatever she had. This would have been, she pauses, calculating, maybe 1700. Early 1700s. Country people. Not much available. Dried grass. You think about that. The texture of it. The way it would shift and break apart with movement. The smell. Did it work? Well enough to get on with things, I suppose. She delivers the eggs to their plates with the authority of someone who has just put the final piece of an argument in place. Women have been getting on with things since the beginning of time. That's rather the point. Let's take Mrs. Beeks's grandmother's dried grass and follow it backwards through time, because this history goes further and stranger than you probably know, and the night is long, and I want you to understand the full shape of it. Dried grass, moss, wool, papyrus. These are the soft, absorbent materials of the natural world, and women across cultures have reached for them with the same logic. They are available, they are gentle, they absorb. Moss, particularly sphagnum moss, has remarkable absorbent properties. Sphagnum can hold up to 20 times its own weight in water. It was used in the First World War, centuries after Mrs. Beeks's grandmother's grandmother, as wound dressing in field hospitals when cotton supplies ran short. But before that, in the boggy northern regions of Europe and the Americas and northern Asia, women had been using it for menstrual management for generations, and for infant care. Dryght sphagnum packed into birch bark carrying pouches was used as diapering material by some indigenous groups. The moss did the work. In tropical regions, the inner bark of various trees beaten soft. In some parts of Asia, specific plant fibres, prepared in traditional ways. In some parts of Africa, rolled leaves or absorbent plant material. Everywhere, women looked at what was around them and thought, that might work. And then they tried it and found out whether it worked and shared the information with their daughters. This is how almost all of this knowledge moved. Woman to woman, mother to daughter, older neighbour to younger neighbour, whispered in kitchens and spoken at wells and demonstrated in the quiet hours when men weren't present. There was no written record because nobody wrote about this. It was not considered a subject for writing. The physicians who wrote about women's bodies, and they did write about women's bodies, copiously, with tremendous confidence and almost no actual knowledge, wrote about menstruation as a theoretical and physiological phenomenon. What to do about it practically, how to manage it from day to day, what materials worked and which chafed, and how to rinse and reuse without causing infection. None of that made it into the texts. It was in the hands, in the knowledge that passed between hands. The morning goes on, you finish the tea, you thank Mrs. Beeks, who doesn't acknowledge the thanks but gives a slight nod that means the same thing. Back to work. The main rooms need dusting. This is your job this week. You rotate between duties on a schedule that Mrs. Holt administers with the same devotion she gives everything else. This week you're on upstairs rooms and general cleaning. Next week you will be on laundry. The week after, you'll be on lamps and polishing and the kitchen assistant's rota. Laundry week. You think about laundry week while you run a cloth over the surfaces in the morning room, the mahogany mantelpiece, the picture frames, the tops of the bookshelves, working from top to bottom the way you were taught so the falling dust is always caught by the cloth below. Laundry week is when you understand everything, because all the laundry goes through the same process, and you do it all, and there is nothing in the laundry that is a secret from the person doing the laundry. This is a social fact that has been true forever. The women who managed other women's clothing always knew everything about those women's bodies. The servants who did laundry in great houses knew which mistress was pregnant before it was announced, because they washed the linens. They knew which mistress was unwell, which was regular, which was irregular. They knew, and they said nothing, because discretion was the professional currency. And because saying something was simply not done, and because the women who employed them would have been destroyed by the idea that anyone knew, because the fiction of bodily mystery, the idea that a lady existed somehow above and apart from the physical processes of her body, was integral to the whole performance of being a lady. The fiction required everyone's cooperation, including yours. The morning room has 14 surfaces that need dusting when you count them properly. You count them properly. 3 shelves, 2 window sills, the mantelpiece and its ornaments, 6 separate pieces, each requiring individual attention. The side table, the writing desk, careful of the papers, the piano lid, the picture frames on the wall, 40 minutes, during which you think about laundry and what it tells you, every single month, in this house, in every house like it. The laundry reveals the same truth. Women's bodies do not care about social class. The mistress of the house and the housemaid have the same biology, the same monthly, the same need, the same practical problem to solve. What differs is everything else. What differs is who has to work through it and who can rest. What differs is whether you have access to flannel cloths kept in a locked drawer by someone who has thought about your needs, or whether you're in a household where no such provision exists and you must manage entirely alone. What differs is whether you can afford to buy commercial preparations from a chemist on Regent Street. What differs is whether there is a fireplace in your room, so that on the worst days you can at least be warm. These differences are enormous, and they track with almost perfect fidelity the differences in class and resources that govern everything else. Downstairs, the dining room next. The dining room is used twice a day and must be made ready for both occasions. Right now, for the morning, you're readying it for the family's breakfast, which means clean cloth on the table, which it already has from yesterday evening supper, and which you are checking for any spots or stains that might require the tablecloth to be changed, which would mean back to the linen cupboard, which would mean waking something in the household linen hierarchy that would eventually reach Mrs. Holt. The tablecloth is fine. You check the silver on the sideboard. The sideboard is dark mahogany, massive, lined with silver platters and dishes and tureens that catch the morning light now beginning to come through the dining room window. You're not in charge of the silver polishing. That is a whole separate duty. But you check that things are in order, that nothing has been moved or disturbed in the night, that the whole arrangement is as Mrs. Holt requires it. It is. You arrange the chairs to precise angles, 3 on each side, 1 at each end. The angles matter. Mrs. Holt has an opinion about the angles of dining chairs that she has communicated several times with exactness. The clock on the mantelpiece reads 7:15. Breakfast will be served at 7:30. You go upstairs to help Elsie with the hot water, because Elsie is only 14 and the copper cans are heavy. This is the thing about a day in service that no one outside service fully understands. It doesn't stop. There is no moment between rising before 5 and being released after dinner at 9 or 10 where you're not needed to be doing something. The tasks follow each other with the implacability of tides, one done, the next arriving, and underneath all of it, this constant background management of your own body, the awareness of it, the monitoring. This is what Mrs. Beeks meant when she said women have been getting on with things. You get on with things, the hot water, the copper cans, upstairs, down, upstairs, down. The cans are heavy and they are hot, and you must carry them without spilling and without splashing yourself, because you will not have a chance to change until this evening. By 7 o'clock you've carried 4 cans of hot water to 4 different rooms. Your back aches. Not dramatically, not incapacitatingly, but it aches with the specific low ache of this particular time of month, the kind that sits in your hips and makes the stairs more work than they usually are. You have learned not to show this. Women in service who show discomfort are considered unreliable. Mrs. Holt's notebook contains, you suspect, some notation about reliability. You intend to be reliable. You intend to be reliable enough that eventually in some future you can barely picture. You might become a senior housemaid, and then a housekeeper yourself, with your own leather notebook and your own locked drawer and your own management of the younger girls who come through looking grey-faced on difficult mornings. This is the plan. The plan requires not showing that your back aches. But now the family is descending to breakfast, and you need to get below stairs and be invisible, because the first rule of service is that you're not seen down the servants' stairs into the kitchen. The family's breakfast will take 40 minutes. During those 40 minutes you have, your own second breakfast, more bread, a piece of cold bacon from the rind Mrs. Beeks has left out, another cup of tea if the pot has any left, and then the making of the beds and the full turning of all the upstairs rooms, which should take you until 11 if you are efficient. Mrs. Beeks gives you the bacon without being asked. This is its own kind of kindness, dressed as economy. The beds. Let me tell you about making beds in 1887, because it is not what you might imagine. There is no flat-pack linen, no fitted sheet, no mattress protector of the kind that exists for the obvious practical purpose. The beds have cotton-ticking mattresses, or wool or horsehair, depending on the room and the occupant, covered with a bottom sheet, a top sheet, and then blankets, and then the counterpane, which is the decorative top layer. All of these must be stripped, aired, and remade daily in a household of this quality. A good bed takes 12 minutes to make properly. To strip, air all the layers by throwing them over the footboard and allowing air to circulate. Check for any damage or staining. Reassemble in the correct order, with the sheets properly stretched at the corners, the counterpanes smooth and taut and centred, the pillows plumped and positioned. 12 minutes per bed. There are 7 beds to make. 84 minutes if you do not stop. But you also need to dust each room, empty the chamber pots, rinse them, refill the water pitchers, tidy any items left out, check for anything needing repair or replacement, and be out of each room before any possibility of encountering the family, because you are not, in the normal order of things, supposed to exist in their world. The chamber pots. I'm bringing this up because it's part of the same system, the same reality, and ignoring it would be dishonest. In 1887, even a comfortable Mayfair townhouse does not have full indoor plumbing for every room. The house has a water closet on the ground floor installed about 15 years ago, and there are plans to install one on the first floor, but those plans have not yet come to fruition. Until they do, the bedrooms on the upper floors use chamber pots, which are kept in a cabinet beside each bed, which are used in the night, and which are collected and emptied and rinsed and replaced every morning as part of the first duties of the housemaids. You do this without flinching now. 8 months ago it was the thing you were least prepared for. 8 months of practice and it has become simply part of the morning, as unremarkable in its own way as the fireplace ash. The body produces what it produces, and someone must manage it. And in this household that someone is you. This is also history that doesn't get written down. Into Mrs. Ashworth's room. Mrs. Ashworth has already gone downstairs for breakfast. Her room is empty, scented with the particular combination of powder and rose water that belongs to her. Her dressing table is arranged with the precision of someone who knows exactly where everything should be, and notices when it isn't. On her washstand, alongside the ceramic pitcher and basin, there is a small cabinet, low, dark wood, about the size of a hat box, inconspicuous. You've cleaned around it for 8 months without looking inside it, because you don't look inside things that aren't your business. But you know what it contains, not because anyone has told you, because you have done the laundry, and because you have observed, and because you are not unintelligent, and because this is the kind of knowing that comes from proximity and attention. Inside that cabinet is Mrs. Ashworth's sanitary apparatus, which consists of a reusable sanitary apron, which is a garment designed specifically for this purpose, with loops and buttons that secure a pad in place, several flannel pads of better quality than the ones in Mrs. Jennings' locked drawer, their edges more neatly finished, the flannel softer, and what you suspect is a small supply of a commercial preparation that her doctor has recommended, Mrs. Ashworth's doctor is a man named Dr. Heathmore, who visits the house monthly to check on her constitution, which he describes as delicate. Mrs. Ashworth is not, in your observation, particularly delicate. She runs a household of 11 people with the efficiency of a railway timetable. She manages a social calendar of considerable complexity. She does this while wearing a corset that compresses her middle by approximately 4 inches and a dress that weighs 7 pounds. Delicate. But Dr. Heathmore is the authority, and Dr. Heathmore has provided something from his dispensary, which is why that cabinet sits on a washstand, the sanitary apron. Let me explain this, because it is the first step in a commercial technology that will eventually lead to what you currently find in any pharmacy. The sanitary apron, or sanitary belt, is a garment that first appeared in commercial form in the 1850s and 1860s, as the Industrial Revolution made mass-produced garments and goods available to a wider market, and as the emerging medical and hygiene reform movements began to treat women's bodily management as a commercial and medical problem, rather than a purely private domestic one. It is, in principle, simple. A belt or apron that goes around the hips or waist, with loops or ties or buttons that hold a pad in place. The pad can be removed and replaced without removing the belt. The belt stays clean, the pad is disposable or washable. This is the same principle behind the sanitary belt and disposable pad systems that will be sold commercially through most of the 20th century, right up until adhesive strips make the belt unnecessary in the 1970s. In 1887, the sanitary apron is available in several commercial forms. Southall Brothers in Birmingham began selling sanitary towels for ladies in the 1880s. They come in boxes, wrapped discreetly, purchasable through chemists or by catalogue. The towels themselves are cotton wadding wrapped in soft gauze, designed to be used once and disposed of. The accompanying belt holds them in place. At 2 shillings and 6pence for a box of 12, they cost roughly a day's wages for a working-class woman. Disposable at that price means disposable if you are comfortable. For most of the women in this house, they are not an option. For Mrs. Ashworth, who has a household account at Harrods and a monthly allowance that exceeds what Mrs. Holt earns in a year, they are not even remarkable. Go on. Make the bed. Don't spend too long in here. The sheets come away cleanly. The mattress, aired. The layers rebuilt. Bottom sheet, pulled taut at each corner with the proper hospital fold that you learned in your first week and have since performed approximately 1,000 times. Top sheet, 2 blankets, counterpane, smoothed from the centre outward. 12 minutes. Into the corridor, into Miss Clara's room. Miss Clara is still in the house, not yet ready to go out, and her room shows it. The bed is more disordered, the sheets pulled apart, evidence of a night of movement. Her dressing table is scattered with the detritus of a morning in progress. Powder jar open, 3 separate combs, a hairpin on the floor that you pick up and set on the edge of the tray. The small white package from the chemist on Regent Street is no longer on the dressing table. She has used it, presumably, tucked the product away, taken care of herself with the ease of someone who has a solution and can afford to maintain it without thinking particularly hard about it. You make her bed in 12 minutes, into the corridor. Miss Evelyn's room. Miss Evelyn is still in bed. She's under the covers with a hot water bottle pressed against her middle and a novel held up in front of her face, which she lowers when you come in. Good morning again, Agnes. Good morning, miss. Shall I come back later for the room? No, please. Carry on. You work around her. This is not unusual. Sometimes guests remain in bed while rooms are tended, and you navigate around their presence with practiced invisibility. But Miss Evelyn is not particularly interested in the fiction of your invisibility this morning. She watches you as you move around the room. "Agnes," she says. "Miss?" Does he help at all, if you move about, or does it make it worse? You pause. This is the second time this morning she's done this, reached across the specific formal distance between you in a way that is not quite correct, not quite improper, but certainly unusual. "Movement helps, miss," you say carefully, generally. She watches you straighten the objects on her dressing table, restore them to their proper positions, remove the water pitcher to replace it downstairs. "My mother says rest is essential." Your mother has the opportunity to rest, miss. You say this without thinking, and the moment it leaves your mouth you know it is too direct, too close to something that should stay unsaid. There is a silence. Miss Evelyn sets down her book. "That is quite true," she says slowly, and then, "And you don't." "I have work to do, miss." "Yes." She's looking at you with something complicated in her face. The 17-year-old daughter of the house looking at the 16-year-old housemaid with an expression that might be guilt, or might be curiosity, or might be the first time she's thought about something that has always been directly in front of her. "Yes, I suppose you do." You take the picture, you go back to work. Let's go further back now, while you carry the picture down the corridor, while you walk these well-carpeted halls between the family's rooms and the servants' back stairs. Let's go to the medieval period, because the medieval period is where several of the most persistent myths about menstrual management originate, and where the practice diverged most dramatically between what rich women did and what poor women did. In medieval Europe, and we're talking roughly from the 6th century CE through the end of the 15th, menstruation was heavily freighted with religious and philosophical significance. The Catholic Church's position on menstruation evolved over centuries and was never entirely consistent, but the general inherited tradition from classical and biblical sources was that menstrual blood was impure, that menstruating women were in a state that required them to be excluded from certain religious activities and spaces, and that the blood itself was dangerous. From Leviticus, which most of medieval Europe treated as medical as much as religious text, a woman during her monthly was unclean. Anyone who touched her was unclean. Anything she lay on or sat upon was unclean. This was a 7-day state, after which she underwent a purification ritual. In practice, how stringently these rules were observed depended enormously on where you were, who you were, and what century it was. The early medieval church was more inclined towards strict interpretation. By the high medieval period, especially in urban areas, the exclusions had softened somewhat in practice, if not in theory. But the underlying belief that this blood was something to be hidden and managed and kept away from public life shaped everything about how women actually dealt with it day to day. What did medieval women use? This is where the historical record becomes genuinely sparse, because the historical record was kept by monks and scholars and physicians who were not particularly interested in the practical domestic management of female bodily functions. What we know from the archaeological record, from literary references, from the occasional medical text, from accounts that survive, rags, primarily rags. The phrase "on the rag" appears to date from this period, though it's difficult to pin the etymology precisely. The rag, torn from old clothing, folded, held in place by undergarments or hand, was the primary solution. The nature of medieval undergarments, which for women typically consisted of a long linen shift or chemise worn directly against the skin, meant that a cloth could be folded and tucked within the skirts of the shift. It would move, it would shift, it would require management. For working women, and in the medieval period most women worked in fields and markets and workshops and kitchens, this meant working with this management as a constant background task. Harvest time happened in August and September regardless of anyone's cycle. Markets were on market days. Ploughing and planting and harvesting were seasonal and could not be rescheduled. So you went to work, you carried your rag, you managed. For wealthy women, the situation was different in matters of material. Access to finer cloth meant softer, better cloth to work with. Access to servants meant someone else dealing with the washing. Access to private space meant more privacy for the management. But fundamentally, the tool was the same. The rag was the rag, whether it was fine linen or rough wool. There is another option recorded in medieval medical texts, though it was considered medicinal rather than practical. The fumigation. This is medieval medicine's answer to menstrual management, which gives you a sense of how far medieval medicine was from actually understanding what was happening. Fumigation involved burning specific herbs or substances and directing the smoke upward toward the body in ways intended to regulate the blood, make it flow more freely, make it flow less freely, or in some cases stop it altogether. The smoke of wormwood, the smoke of various resins. Did women actually use this? Sometimes. In addition to other methods, as medicinal management of a perceived imbalance, not as a replacement for the practical management of the blood itself. The fumigation is, in short, the medieval version of Dr. Heathmore's dispensary preparation. Different century, same logic. The body's doing something it shouldn't, or doing it too much or too little, and we will apply a remedy. The actual management of the daily reality was still the rag. Down the back stairs with the pitcher, into the kitchen. Refill from the large copper pot that cook has kept hot on the range. Mrs. Beeks looks at you. Still grey, she says. I'm well, cook, thank you. There's hot ginger water on the trivet, she says. If you want it. I made it for Miss Evelyn, but there's plenty. Ginger water, an old remedy. Her grandmother's remedy, probably. Hot water steeped with ginger, which is warming and slightly stimulating, and does genuinely help with cramping in the way that a great many old remedies do. Not by addressing the underlying mechanism, since no one until much later in history understands the underlying mechanism, but by providing the body with warmth and specific compounds that ease muscle tension. Women have been giving each other ginger water or something equivalent for a very long time. You pour a cup. It is hot and sharp and faintly sweet, and it helps. Back up with the refilled pitcher. Miss Evelyn's room. Fresh water. She's fallen asleep again over her book, the novel splayed open on the coverlet. You set the pitcher down quietly. You tuck her book closed with the ribbon to mark her place. You bank the fire so it will keep without needing attention for another hour. You leave without waking her. Into the main corridor, which is in full morning activity now, the family descended to their various occupations. Mr. Ashworth to his study, Mrs. Ashworth to her morning room for correspondence, Miss Clara getting her hat on in the hall with Mrs. Jennings's assistance. You press yourself to the wall. You wait. You are invisible. Miss Clara's hat is pale blue with a spray of silk flowers and a small feather that curves forward over the brim. It takes Mrs. Jennings 3 attempts to pin it correctly. Miss Clara stands still for this with the practised patience of someone who's been wearing elaborate hats since childhood. "Thank you, Jennings," she says when it's done. Miss Clara, she goes out. The front door opens, closes. A small gust of cold March air reaches even to the back of the hall where you're standing, smelling of coal smoke and hoarse and wet stone. Spring is coming but hasn't arrived yet. You go finish the rooms. The morning takes until 11:30. By then every bed is made, every room dusted and swept, every chamber pot dealt with, every fireplace checked. The lamps need trimming, but that is afternoon work. The silver needs attention, but that is tomorrow's work, not today's. Mrs. Holt, when you report back to her at the kitchen table, reviews her notebook. The fire in the morning room, she says. Check its drawing properly. I thought it was smoking yesterday. Yes, Mrs. Holt. And the left curtain in the second drawing room needs to be rehung. The ring on the rail has come loose. You'll need to ask Thomas. Thomas is one of the 2 male servants in the household, and he is responsible for the heavy things. Yes, Mrs. Holt. She writes something. You are not being criticised exactly. This is just how Mrs. Holt operates. Notes are taken. Things are addressed. The household continues. You may have your dinner at 12:30, she says. I'll need you back for the afternoon rooms at 2. Dinner at 12:30 is the midday meal for the servants. It is served in the servants' hall, which is a room below stairs that functions as a combination dining room and common room. Today it is boiled mutton, potatoes and a bread pudding that Mrs. Beeks has constructed from yesterday's leftover bread with dried fruit and sugar. The food is plain, and it is real, and there is enough of it. This is not true everywhere. In some households, the servants are fed worse than the family's dogs. Mrs. Beeks runs a kitchen where the servants' meals are a matter of principle. Perhaps because she's the cook and the cook controls the kitchen. And the principle is that people who work hard need to eat properly. So you eat properly. You sit in the servants' hall with Elsie and with Mary, the other housemaid, who is 20 and has been in service 4 years, and who knows things you're still learning. There is no particular conversation. You eat. The mutton is tough but hot. The potatoes are good. The bread pudding is good enough to be a reason to keep living. Elsie eats with the ferocious dedication of someone who spent her childhood not always having enough. She's 14 and from Whitechapel, and has been in service for 6 months and is still in the phase of marvelling quietly that there is always bread. Mary eats with the efficiency of someone who has made peace with the fact that meals in service happen fast, between tasks, and must be taken seriously because the next opportunity might be many hours away. You eat with the particular gratitude of someone who has had a harder morning than the morning technically justified. Miss Evelyn's unwell, says Mary. She is, you say. A pause. Inconvenient timing, says Mary. Isn't it always, you say. This is, between women in service, the whole of the necessary conversation on the subject. Everything has been communicated, everything understood. Elsie looks between you both. She's 14 and hasn't started yet. Mrs. Jennings knows this and has already, with a precision that speaks of long practice, made sure that Elsie knows where the locked drawer is and that she can access it when the time comes. 14 is not unusual. In 1887, anywhere between 11 and 16 is the average range. 12 and 13 are common. Earlier occurrences have been documented, later ones too. Nobody knows when it will come for Elsie, and nobody's going to tell her exactly, because that is not quite how any of this works. Mrs. Jennings has told her a version of what to expect. Her mother probably told her a version. What she knows is probably an aggregate of partial information from multiple sources, some of it accurate, some of it coloured by the fear and mythology that has always surrounded the subject. This is historically normal. The transmission of knowledge about menstruation has never been systematic. It has never, until the 20th century, been the subject of formal education. It has moved always through private and semi-private channels, mother to daughter, woman to woman, the conversation in the corner of the kitchen, the quiet instruction from the older housemaid to the younger. And in that transmission, accuracy was always imperfect, and the mythological content was always mixed with the practical. Every culture, every century, every social class had its version of the things you must not do during your monthly. They contradict each other across cultures, which tells you something about their basis in actual fact. Do not touch cold water. Do not bathe at all. Do not bathe in hot water. Do not touch plants. Do not touch animals. Do not look at your husband. Do not be in the presence of food. Do not be in the presence of other menstruating women. Do not eat certain things. Only eat certain things. Rest completely. Do not rest. Movement will help the blood flow. Stay in a separate room. Do not go outside. Do not go near churches. Do not handle meat. Do not handle crops. In Victorian England, the medical community's position on menstruation is a fascinating document in the history of how much intelligent people can confidently believe while being almost entirely wrong. The Victorian medical consensus, based on the humoral theory updated with elements of the new cellular biology that is beginning to emerge, is that menstruation represents the shedding of excess material, a cleansing process necessary to maintain female health, and that any interference with this process, any disruption, any excitement, any physical exertion that might divert nervous energy away from the process, is medically dangerous. Therefore, rest, complete rest if possible. Avoidance of cold water, which is believed to stop the flow abruptly and cause it to be, in medical terms, driven inward, with consequences for the nervous system. Avoidance of excitement, avoidance of strong emotions, avoidance of reading material that might stimulate the intellect to an unhealthy degree. This medical opinion is held by men who have never menstruated. It is based on theory and classical precedent and the testimony of their female patients, filtered through the extreme difficulty Victorian women had in speaking honestly to Victorian male doctors about their bodies, filtered further through the doctor's own theories and prejudices. What it produces in practice is a medical framework that tells wealthy women to rest while doing nothing to address the needs of working-class women who cannot rest and who are not the patients of Victorian physicians, and whose practical experience of managing their monthly while working 16-hour days directly contradicts the entire theoretical framework. But poor women's experience has never historically been the basis for medical theory. The bread pudding is excellent. You eat 2 portions because Mrs. Beeks has made more than enough, and she doesn't take offence at a healthy appetite. 1:15. Time to go. The afternoon begins with the curtain. Thomas is found in the pantry, polishing something. He is a man of 50 with large hands and a general attitude of contained impatience that is directed at the fabric of the house itself, rather than at any person in it. He does not find it remarkable or inconvenient that the curtain ring needs fixing. This is what the house does, constantly. The slow entropy of a building full of people, objects wearing out, coming loose, requiring attention. He follows you upstairs with a ladder and a tool roll and has the curtain rehung in 12 minutes. You thank him. He goes back to the pantry. The afternoon rooms are different from the morning rooms, less intensive, It's maintenance, not the full morning reset. You are checking things rather than doing things. Checking that the morning's fires are drawing well. Checking that no one has rung and been ignored. The bellboard in the kitchen, the indicators that show which room is calling, has not, as far as you know, been ignored this morning, but you check. The morning room first. The fire is drawing well. No issue. The library. Mr. Ashworth is in the library. He's reading a newspaper with the concentrated intensity he brings to everything. He does not look up when you come in. You check the fire, check the lamp oil on the desk lamp, retreat. The second drawing room. This is the room that is used for receiving visitors in the afternoon, when Mrs. Ashworth has her at-home days. Today is not an at-home day, but the room must be kept ready. Clean, aired, fires prepared though not yet lit. The afternoon is still cool enough that a fire will be wanted by 3 o'clock, which means you lay it now. You're laying the fire, down on your knees, the familiar choreography of paper and kindling and coal, when you hear footsteps in the hallway. Not the family's footsteps. These are quick and light and belong to someone who moves at the pace of someone who has somewhere to be immediately. Mrs. Jennings. She appears in the doorway. Agnes. Her voice is, as always, level. Mrs. Jennings. Are you managing? It is not quite a question. It is an inquiry offered in the form of a statement, leaving you the option to address it or not. Perfectly well, Mrs. Jennings. Thank you. She looks at you for a moment. She's been in service for 16 years, beginning in a much less comfortable household than this one. She has, in the way that you know things about the people you live and work beside, managed every version of every difficulty that service presents, including this one, including worse ones. There's more flannel in the drawer, she says, if you need it this afternoon. Thank you, Mrs. Jennings. She goes back to whatever she was doing, the flannel cloths. Let me stay with the flannel cloths for a moment, because they are the central technology of this particular era, and they deserve some attention. Flannel is a wool fabric, loosely woven, brushed on both sides to raise a nap, soft and slightly fuzzy. It has been made in Wales and the English West Country for centuries, and by the Victorian period it's being produced in industrial quantities in the mills of the north and sold cheaply enough to be accessible even to working households. For menstrual cloths, flannel has several advantages over plain cotton. It is softer against skin. It is naturally somewhat water repellent on its surface, while being absorbent in its body, and the nap helps hold it in place better than a slippery cotton surface. It washes and dries well, though it must be washed in cold water first. Hot water sets protein stains, which is a fact that women who do laundry know with the directness of lived experience, and can be reused for years if properly cared for. The cloths in Mrs. Jennings' drawer were probably cut from worn-out flannel petticoats. They have served their purpose as petticoats, and now serve this one. Nothing is wasted. This is the household economy of the Victorian working class, and it extends to everything. Clothing becomes rags. Rags become cleaning cloths. Cleaning cloths become eventually fire kindling. The fabric continues to be useful until there is nothing of it left. Women in households that could not afford even flannel, in the slum courts of Whitechapel and St. Giles, in the factory workers' terraces of Manchester and Birmingham, in the mining communities of Wales and the Midlands, used whatever they had, rags of any kind, strips of old newspaper, used internally against the skin and replaced as needed, which caused their own problems with print dye and moisture. Newspaper. This is perhaps the most startling and least discussed of the historical adaptations. and it was used by women throughout the 19th century in circumstances where no fabric could be spared. Rolled newspaper, stuffed into whatever garment served as underclothing, removed, turned, reversed, reused until it disintegrated. This was not unusual. This was what you did when you had nothing else. And women who worked in extreme physical conditions, the agricultural workers, the laundresses who stood waist-deep in laundry water, the women in the cotton mills where the work involved constant movement in hot, humid conditions. These women faced a specific additional problem that has rarely been addressed directly in the historical record: heavy labour affect cycles. Significantly, women doing very heavy physical work combined with the chronic semi-malnutrition that characterised working-class life in this period often had irregular, lighter or entirely absent cycles. The body, under significant physical and nutritional stress, makes reproductive decisions that are not consciously chosen by the woman. This is physiology, not willpower. The working women of the Victorian period were, in some cases, managing this problem less often than their more comfortable counterparts, simply because their bodies were too depleted to maintain a regular cycle. This is not an advertisement for poverty as a menstrual management strategy. The conditions that produced this effect were also producing everything else that characterised working-class life in this period: tuberculosis, rickets, infant mortality, shortened lifespans, chronic pain. It is simply the reality. The body does what the body does under the conditions it is given. The fire in the second drawing room catches cleanly. You replace the fire guard and move on. The afternoon ticks forward in tasks. The lamp trimming. 6 lamps in the main rooms, the oil reservoirs checked and filled, the wicks trimmed to the correct length, the glass chimneys cleaned of yesterday's soot with a cloth, and then with a dry chamois. The lamp trimming is a job you've come to like, actually, for the concentration it requires, and the satisfying clarity of a lamp chimney restored from smoked grey to clear glass. There is also, this afternoon, the ironing. Not yours alone. Mary does half, but the household's ironing accumulates through the week, and Wednesday afternoon is when it gets done. Ironing in 1887 involves heavy flat irons heated on the kitchen range, tested for temperature against a piece of brown paper or with a damp finger, moved across fabric in long, smooth strokes, then exchanged for the next iron when they cool. You keep 3 irons going at once, 1 on the range heating, 1 in use, 1 cooling, cycling through constantly. The smell of heated cotton and starch. The weight of the iron in your hand, maybe 5 pounds when cold, feeling heavier by the hour. The sound of it sliding, the hiss of steam from a damp cloth pressed against a stubborn crease. You have ironed approximately 10,000 items since arriving here 8 months ago. You can iron a shirt in 7 minutes and a pillowcase in 3. Table linen takes longer, because the size requires repositioning. The ironing takes 2.5 hours. Your lower back, by the end of it, has moved from a dull ache to something more persistent. The kind of ache that settles in and becomes your constant companion for the day. You have changed the flannel cloth twice, both times quickly, in the privacy of the room that has a lock on the door, which is the 3rd floor storage room that nobody uses on Wednesday afternoons. The used cloths go into a small cloth bag, knotted closed, which lives in your apron pocket. At the end of the day, when your duties are finished and you can access the laundry room without anyone watching, you will put them to soak in cold water. Tomorrow morning you will wash them. This is the routine. This is what routine looks like when you don't have Southall's sanitary towels. Let me tell you about the laundry, because the laundry is where everything becomes visible. Laundry in a Victorian household of this size happens twice a week, usually Monday and Thursday, though different households have different schedules, and the Monday laundry reflects the full weight of the weekend and any social events that required additional linen. The laundry room is in the basement, adjacent to the kitchen. It has 3 large copper tubs on stands over built-in fireboxes that heat the water from below, a mangle for pressing water out of heavy items, a series of wooden drying racks that can be pulled up on a pulley to hang near the ceiling, and a smell that is its own specific world. Hot water and lye soap and the clean mineral smell of steam and something beneath that, the smell of fabric that has been used, that contains evidence of the lives lived inside the clothes. On laundry days, you and Mary and Elsie and sometimes Mrs. Beaks's kitchen assistant are in the laundry room from 6 in the morning until the light goes. You sort, you soak, you wash, you mangle, you hang, you watch the weather and bring things in when rain threatens. You wash everything. The family's personal linens are washed separately from the household linens, the sheets and tablecloths, and the servants' linens are washed in a third load. But you wash all of it, and the personal linens of 5 women in this household, combined with the personal linens of your own household of servants, tell a story that no amount of Victorian discretion can entirely conceal. You learn to wash them the way Mrs. Jennings taught you. Cold water first, always to prevent setting. A good soak, then hand-working the fabric against itself, the friction of the rubbing doing what chemical action alone cannot. Then into hot water with soap, then rinse, then mangle. You learn to do this without comment, without expression, without acknowledgement that you are doing anything other than washing cloth. But you know what you're washing, and so does every laundress in every house in London. And so does every washwoman who takes in laundry from households that can't maintain an in-house laundress. And so have all the women throughout history who have washed other women's linens. They know everything, and they say nothing, because their employment depends on saying nothing. The laundry worker's knowledge is one of the great unwritten archives of women's history. They know the cycles of the women they work for. They know which one is regular and which one skips. They know when something is different. They know when someone is trying to manage something that isn't managing itself cleanly. They wash it out. They say nothing. They bring the fresh linens back. This is also a form of care. Evening approaches. The light fades. The lamps are lit. Dinner for the family is served at 7:30. It requires the table laid, the silver in its correct places, the flowers in the centrepiece fresh. Elsie's job gathering them from the morning delivery that sits in a bucket in the cold store. It requires the appropriate serving dishes warmed in advance, the wine poured and decanted, the courses ready to be brought up from the kitchen at the right moments. This is Mrs. Holt's domain, orchestrated with the precision she brings to everything, and you are a component in the mechanism, carrying things and placing things and carrying empty things back, existing in the margins of the family's dining room without appearing to exist. The family eats. The servants eat later after the family has finished. By 9 o'clock the family's in the drawing room. By 9:30 the servants have had their own supper. By 10 Mrs. Holt releases you for the night. The night. The day is done. You sit in the kitchen for a few minutes after the others have gone up, because you need to deal with the laundry before bed, and the kitchen is warm, and there is the residual heat from the range that has been running since before dawn. 14 hours roughly from your first rising to this moment. 14 hours during which you've carried coal, cleaned fires, made 7 beds, dusted and swept the main rooms, helped with hot water, checked lamps, laid fires, ironed linen, served at dinner, and all of it, all 14 hours, alongside the constant background management of something that the medical establishment says you should be resting for. You're not resting. You're sitting in the kitchen of a Mayfair townhouse at 10 o'clock at night, about to go deal with soaking cloths in cold water. And you think for a moment about every other woman who has ever sat in some equivalent of this kitchen, at some equivalent of this hour, at the end of some version of this day, managing this same thing with whatever she had. The Egyptian woman with her papyrus, prepared the same way, soaked in water, shaped and placed and managed, while she carried water from the Nile or ground grain or wove cloth or managed whatever her particular day required. The Roman woman with her wool spinning at the end of a day of Roman work, her day no different in its fundamental shape from yours, tasks, demands, management. The medieval woman in the field at harvest, working through the heat of August, the wool cloth secured as best she could manage inside the layers of a rough skirt, carrying sheaves until the light died, then walking home to a house that was probably cold. The Tudor woman in the great houses you have read about dimly, in the sort of history books that exist for the purpose of making history seem entirely about kings and wars. The women who served in those houses managing the same thing you're managing, in the same silence, with the same practical adaptations, while the history books noted down the names of the men around them. The Georgian woman, your grandmother's generation, in a slightly different dress but the same fundamental situation. A cloth, a pin, a quiet negotiation between the body's reality and the day's demands, and you. 14 of March, 1887. In the laundry room now, the door closed, the single candle on the shelf throwing your shadow large against the wall. You do the soaking. Cold water in the smallest tub, the cloths from the bag in your pocket released into it. The water changes colour slightly. You fill the tub more, let them sit. You will finish this in the morning. You blow the candle out. The stairs are dark. Your hand on the wall finding the way up. The attic room is cold. The small fireplace has a banked fire that gives warmth but no light. Your roommate, Jane, who's been here 6 weeks and who is 12 years old and who cried every night for the first 3 weeks and no longer cries every night, is asleep already, curled on her side with her back to the room, 12 years old. You helped her 3 weeks ago when her time came for the first time. You showed her the locked drawer. You explained Mrs. Jennings. You gave her the information your mother had given you, adjusted for the specifics of this house and this situation. You're 16 years old, and you're already the person passing the knowledge forward. This is how it has always worked. Into bed. The straw mattress. The thin blanket that you have supplemented with a folded shawl over your feet. The ceiling low above you, the plaster rough. The house is quieting. The family's voices from the drawing room 2 floors below, muffled. Then the creak of stairs as they begin to go up. The house settling into night. You close your eyes. Let me tell you the rest of the history now while you're falling asleep. The part that comes after you. The part that happens while you're aging and the century is turning and the world is changing in ways you cannot yet imagine. Let's go forward. Not backward anymore. Forward. From this room, from this night. From this candle-smelling cold attic air. In 1888, the year after tonight, a physician named Mary Putnam Jacobi, one of the first women to receive a medical degree from the Paris School of Medicine, which she did in 1871 by disguising herself to gain admittance, and then submitted a thesis so brilliant it won the prize usually reserved for men. publishes work demonstrating that menstruation does not require rest, that the Victorian medical establishment's insistence on rest and restriction was not based on physiology but on assumption, that women's bodies during menstruation are not in a depleted or fragile state requiring particular protection. This is not, in 1888, front-page news. It does not immediately change medical practice, but it is the first formally presented counter-evidence based on actual physiological measurement to a theory that has governed women's medical treatment for centuries. The medical establishment does not enjoy this. The medical establishment, which is almost entirely male, tends not to enjoy being told that its core assumptions about female bodies are wrong by a woman who is a physician. But the evidence is the evidence. In the 1890s, commercial menstrual products begin to appear in increasing variety. Belts of various designs, pads of cotton wool wrapped in gauze. Advertisements begin appearing, discreet and oblique, in women's magazines between the recipes and the fashion advice. The language is impenetrable if you don't already know what it means, and entirely transparent if you do. Ladies' hygienic preparations, monthly requisites, sanitary necessities for the active woman. The active woman. This is a new phrase in the 1890s. The idea of the active woman, the woman who cycles, the bicycle craze of the 1890s is a genuine revolution in female mobility and will have actual political consequences. Who plays lawn tennis, who walks long distances for health, who is beginning, cautiously still opposed, but beginning, to enter public life in new ways. The active woman needs products that work while she is active. This is marketing language, but the marketing language is responding to a real social shift. Women are beginning to exist in public space in new ways, and their bodily management must accommodate this. The First World War is the inflection point. In the British and American field hospitals and base hospitals, nurses worked in conditions of enormous physical intensity. They stood for hours, they lifted patients, they worked shifts that made a housemaid's day look short, and they used, for their own menstrual management, the cotton wadding that was available in the hospital supply for wound dressing. It was more absorbent than anything they'd used before. It was softer, and it could be burned or buried after use rather than washed and kept. This is the observation that creates Kotex. Kimberly-Clark, an American paper company, had been producing cellucotton, a material made from processed wood pulp, for use as surgical padding during the war. In 1920, they introduced it commercially as Kotex, a disposable menstrual pad. The name is deliberately obscure, cotton texture, or possibly from the French coton texte, something that implies fabric and softness without saying what the product actually is. The advertising for Kotex from 1920 onward is its own historical document. It is impossible to describe what the product is, for whom it is intended, or what it does. The advertising consists almost entirely of abstract suggestion and the testimonials of nurses who are safe to quote because nursing is a respectable public-facing profession associated with sacrifice and competence. Nurses know, say the early Kotex advertisements. The product is initially sold behind pharmacy counters, requested by asking for it by name, which required saying the word Kotex to a pharmacist, who was often male, and receiving the product wrapped so heavily in plain paper that it appeared to be approximately nothing. This too was standard practice. The wrapping, the discretion, the product arriving in the home in packaging designed to be entirely uninformative about its contents. The plain paper wrap has its own long history. Long before Kotex, the commercial preparations of the 1880s and 1890s were sold in packaging that provided no information on the outside. You ordered them from catalogue or from chemist under code names or euphemism. They arrived wrapped. Women knew what they were. Everyone involved in the transaction knew what they were. The plain paper wrap was a courtesy, or a legal protection, or a social convention, or possibly all three simultaneously, that allowed everyone to pretend that the transaction had been entirely abstract. This is the strange double reality that has governed menstrual management in the public sphere throughout history. It happens to essentially every woman, continuously, for decades of her life, and it is simultaneously one of the most systematically not discussed subjects in recorded human history. The not discussing has consequences, medical consequences. When you can't discuss something, you can't study it, can't understand it, can't develop accurate treatments for conditions that involve it. Endometriosis, a condition in which tissue similar to the uterine lining grows outside the uterus, causing potentially severe pain, was first described medically in the 17th century, but remained poorly studied and widely dismissed as women's pain, an artifact of hysteria or weakness, well into the 20th century. Millions of women experienced it for centuries without diagnosis, without treatment, without the validation of being told that the pain was real and had a cause. Social consequences. When the basic fact of menstruation cannot be discussed in public, you cannot discuss either the products that manage it, which means you cannot discuss their quality, their cost, their accessibility to women who don't have money, the conditions of the people who make them. You cannot make the argument that menstrual products should be available, subsidised, tax-free, as a basic health necessity, which is an argument that will not be won, even partially, until the early 21st century in most of the countries where that argument is even possible to make. Educational consequences. Girls growing up without accurate information about their own bodies, their own cycles, what is normal and what is not, what requires medical attention and what does not. Girls who are frightened by their first period because no one has told them what to expect. Girls who develop incorrect understandings of their own fertility. Women who go undiagnosed for decades with conditions that cause them significant suffering because they believe the suffering is normal, because they've never been given a framework for what is and isn't normal, because the whole subject has always been spoken of, when spoken of at all, in whispers. The not discussing is not neutral. It has costs. It has had costs for centuries. In this attic room in 1887, there are things you do not know. You do not know that what you experience on the worst days of your monthly, the cramping that makes climbing stairs harder, is caused by prostaglandins, hormone-like substances that cause the uterine muscle to contract. You don't know this because prostaglandins will not be identified by science until the 1930s, and their role in menstrual pain will not be clearly established until the 1960s. You know that ginger water helps, you know that heat helps, you know that willow bark tea, which Mrs. Beeks sometimes makes for headaches, also helps with this kind of cramping because it contains salicylate compounds, what will eventually be identified, refined, and sold commercially as aspirin, though aspirin itself won't exist until 1899. You know these things the way you know them, through your body, through the information passed to you by other women, through trial and the kind of error that doesn't get recorded in any book. The knowledge is real, it works, it predates its own scientific explanation by decades and centuries. This is the other thing about the long history of women managing this. The practical knowledge was often good, often accurate, often effective. Women who lived with something for 30 years of their adult lives, who talked to each other about it, who tried things and noted what worked and told their daughters. This accumulated into a body of practical wisdom that was not written down in medical texts and not credited as knowledge in the formal sense, but that worked. The ginger water works, the willow bark tea works, the warmth of the hot water bottle works. Movement, in fact, helps more than rest for most women, just as Mary Putnam Jacobi's research will formally demonstrate. Because women who work through their monthlies and could not rest had discovered this empirically centuries before anyone wrote a paper about it. The body knows things. Women, given the opportunity to pay attention to their own bodies and share information with each other, work things out. The suppression of that conversation, the silencing of it, has not protected women from their bodies. It has only kept them from understanding their bodies better and from being able to make the public arguments that might have led to earlier solutions. In the attic room, your breathing slows. Jane has shifted in her sleep, turned over, her face toward you now in the faint glow from the banked fire. 12 years old and 3 weeks into her own version of this experience. Guided into it by a 16-year-old, who was guided into it by a mother who was guided by her mother, the chain going back further than any of them can see, back through every kitchen and field and laundry room and workshop where women told each other what they needed to know. The house is very quiet now. The Ashworths are in their rooms, Mrs. Holt's light is off, the kitchen is dark and cold and the range is banked for morning. London is not quiet because London is never quiet, but the specific sounds of Mayfair at midnight are different from the daytime sounds. Fewer horses, the occasional cab, a dog somewhere very far away. Your back still aches. Less than this morning, though. The ginger water and the movement through the day have done their work. By tomorrow it will be better. By the day after tomorrow mostly gone. You have managed. As you always manage. As women have always managed. With flannel and pins and ginger water and the knowledge passed hand to hand and the simple determination to carry on. Because the alternative to carrying on is not an option that's ever actually been offered. Before you sleep, let me take you forward one more time. Past Kotex, past the Second World War, past the sanitary belt that will replace the sanitary apron, which will be replaced in turn by the adhesive pad in the 1970s, which changed everything. Let me take you to 1971 in the United States. A group of women in an era when women's liberation is an ongoing and contested social movement with real political power, decides to compile and distribute a book. It is called Our Bodies, Ourselves. It is written by women, for women about women's health, in language that is direct and specific and unafraid. It discusses menstruation. It discusses what is normal and what is not. It discusses management options. It discusses the conditions that can affect menstrual experience. It discusses this directly, in plain language, as a health matter rather than a private embarrassment. The book sells millions of copies. It becomes one of the most influential health texts of the 20th century. And the reason it sells millions of copies, the reason it is revolutionary, is that it is saying, in print, in public, in accessible language, things that women have always told each other in kitchens and laundry rooms and servants' halls, and in quiet voices in the corners of places where men were not listening. It is writing down what was passed by hand. The revolution is not that the information exists. The revolution is that it is allowed to exist in public. In 1887, it is not allowed to exist in public, but you exist. and Jane exists, and Mrs. Beeks exists, and Mrs. Jennings with her locked drawer, and your mother in Taunton who pressed a cloth into your hands before you'd registered the need, and her mother who taught her, and the chain going back, always back, to the first woman who needed to figure something out and figured it out and told the woman beside her. That chain doesn't break. It is unbroken from Egypt to this attic to whatever night you're falling asleep in right now, wherever you are, whenever you are. The window shows nothing, just the faint amber reflection of London's collective light against clouds. Your eyes close. The backache settles to a dull warmth that is almost comfortable, almost a reminder rather than a complaint. Tomorrow the soaking cloths will need rinsing. Tomorrow the fires will need laying, and the beds making, and the lamps trimming, and everything beginning again, same as it always does, same as it will. But that is tomorrow. Right now there is only this. The dark room, the breathing of the sleeping girl beside you, the distant rumble of London at midnight, continuous and indifferent, and somehow, against all reason, comforting. You've carried what you needed to carry today. You've managed. You always manage. The fire in the grate makes a small sound, a settling, a shift of coals finding their new shape. The warmth of it reaches you even here, across the room, a whisper of heat in the cold air. Let the day go now. Let the weight of it dissolve into the dark. Let the ache ease. Let the list of tomorrow's tasks stop forming behind your eyelids. Let the sounds of the house settle around you like the particular sound of a place that knows you, that has your shape in its walls from 8 months of your presence, that will know your shape better still in another 8 months and another. The women who lived these days before you, in Egypt, in Rome, in the medieval fields, in the Tudor great houses, in the cold farms and the steaming factories and the laundry rooms and the kitchens, they all slept eventually. They all reached the end of the day and closed their eyes and let the managing stop for a few hours. This is yours now. The quiet. The end of the managing. Your breath slows. The ceiling above you is invisible in the dark, but you know it is there. The familiar rough plaster. The slightly uneven seam where the wall meets the slope of the roof. Home, in the particular way that anywhere you return to becomes home when you've been away from everywhere else long enough. Centuries from now, girls will grow up not knowing what a sanitary cloth is. They will grow up with products specifically designed for their bodies, designed by people who have actually studied their bodies, available in every pharmacy and supermarket and corner shop, and most of them will not think twice about any of it, because it has always been available to them. They will not know about the flannel cloths in the locked drawer. They will not know about the dried grass or the papyrus or the sea sponges or the wool prepared by firelight. They will not know about the plain paper wrapping or the euphemistic catalogues or the conversations held in whispers in kitchens across centuries. Some of them will find out because they will wonder, and the wondering is a good thing. The wondering is how history gets preserved, how the long work of the women who came before gets acknowledged, how the chain that brought them to their easier morning gets recognized for what it is. A chain of women figuring things out, passing the knowledge forward, making tomorrow slightly less difficult for the woman who comes after. You're a link in that chain, not just in the managing, in the telling, in the quiet instruction you gave Jane 3 weeks ago, in the knowledge you will carry forward from this house to whatever house comes next, whatever life comes next, the knowing that women carry in their hands. Let that be enough for tonight. Let tonight be enough. Sleep comes the way it comes on the hardest days, gradually, then completely. the thoughts slow. The body is grateful for stillness. The cold of the room becomes irrelevant. Somewhere under the city, in the great sewers that Joseph Bazalgette built in the 1850s and 1860s, the water that makes this city habitable moves through its channels, the accumulated water of 1,000,000 lives running toward the sea. Somewhere above the city, the moon is behind clouds, but the stars are there. The same stars that were above Egypt when papyrus was softened at the Nile's edge. Above Rome when wool was prepared in lamplight. Above the medieval fields where women straighten their backs at the end of harvest days. The same stars, different women, same essential thing. You've done it. You've carried the day. Now let it go. Good night.